Welcome to our GUI-XT video tutorial about the use of Excel VBA, that's Visual Basic Applications, to display Excel charts in SAP GUI windows. The Excel program has immense potential, and online you can find examples of many different applications. Today we want to explore the use of some of these applications within the SAP system via GUI-XT. As in previous videos, we will go through a detailed example. In this case, the goal is to display a diagram or chart within an SAP transaction. Calling up the transaction, we can see that a GUI-XT button already exists. It is programmed to display a table showing country and the number of customers per country. This script defines the push button. A group box is drawn and a table is displayed within the group box with two columns, namely country and number of customers. The input script for customers per country, that can be seen here, is used to control the whole process. The first bit of code allows the table to be hidden and displayed, something that is often used in GUI-XT. Then we define a table variable, country, and the number of customers. This table variable is then filled from the database using the group by option of the SQL language, followed by the call. And now the table is filled and there is nothing else to be done. That's the entire input script. But now we want to add a diagram or chart in this empty space. In this case, a chart that Excel will generate in the background. But let's first make the chart by hand in the foreground. Later, the process will be automated. We copy the table values with Ctrl Y and insert them into the Excel spreadsheet. Once the tables are in the spreadsheet, we select two columns and choose a suitable chart type. There are a number of options. You could choose your favorite: bar chart, pie chart, and many others. For each, you can define the colors and other options, but we are not interested in these details at the moment, because we want to do something fancy, namely to insert a map. In this case, we use the world map because we have a lot of countries in the table, and the shading on the map represents the number in the second column. In other words, the darker the color, the larger the number of customers in that country. Now we have gone through creating the chart by hand. But what we really want is for the whole process to be automated. How do we do that? The first step is to start Excel automatically in the input script. This is done by calling a small JavaScript routine. So, start Excel and insert the content of our table variable into the spreadsheet. Call.js calls JavaScript. The routine is called copy table, and we specify the name of our table variable, ctab. So now we just have to write the JavaScript routine. For this, we can use Visual Studio. It's also possible to write a JavaScript routine in any text editor, but Visual Studio is really quite convenient. Let's first copy the function name XL copy table, where XL stands for Excel. The small function we are coding can be used not only here, but also in other situations that require using Excel. Function parameter is the name of the table variable. And now we start Excel. This is done with the Excel automation object excel.application and the command GUIxt.createObject. This assumes Excel is installed. Although we could write a code to deal with the scenario where it is not, we are going to rely on the fact that Excel is installed on the PC and can be started. Now we create a new workbook with the function workbooks.add. This opens an Excel table. For testing purposes, we make the table visible. Later, the table will be hidden and all properties will run in the background. But for testing, it's better to be able to see what's going on. The main task of the function is to copy the content of the GUIxt table variable into the Excel spreadsheet. To do this, we generate a JavaScript object from the GUIxt table variable using the JavaScript JSON object. JSON refers to JavaScript Object Notation. This is easy because GUIxt automatically converts the table variable to the JSON format when it is passed to JavaScript. Yes, so now we have the JavaScript object built in the JSON format and want to copy the values for the object into Excel. For this, we need a loop. First of all, to go through all the rows, named 1, 2, 3, etc. And then for each row, we go through the columns. The column names are those from the table variable, so country and count. Within the loop, we copy the values of the object for a given row and column into Excel where N and K are the corresponding Excel cell coordinates. Now we need the number of the row and the column, which means we have to set up two counters. For example, for N, we start with 0 and then count up per row. The same for K and the columns. Now the value is transferred. With that, the routine is completed, and we now have a short routine that can be used to transfer any GUIxt table variable into an Excel spreadsheet, something that can be useful for any number of applications involving Excel. That all looks good. Let's save the JavaScript file and test our code. The important thing for the test is that we start a new SAP GUI mode because modified JavaScript functions are only loaded in a new mode. This is something important to always keep in mind during development. If you change something in JavaScript, open up a new mode and thereby reload JavaScript. Let's have a look. That looks pretty good. The country codes and the customer numbers have been copied to Excel. For the next step, we now need the developer function in Excel, which is unfortunately not switched on by default. We activate it by checking the box next to developer in the Excel options. Press OK. Now there is a developer button on the toolbar and we can activate record macro. Let's begin by creating a macro named chart map. Now all our actions in Excel are recorded. Selecting columns, creating chart. That always takes a bit of time. And that's all we need at this point, so we can stop recording via the Develop menu in the toolbar. We now have an Excel-generated macro called Chart Map that automatically makes a chart from the first two columns. The code is quite short. We can add a descriptive comment, GUI XT chart generation. Back in the main spreadsheet, we delete the chart and the values and save the Excel file containing the macro locally for now. Later, you can save it to your GUI XT script repository. When saving, it is essential to choose the file type Excel Macro Enabled Workbook, which has the file extension XLSM, can be executed, and has the embedded VBA. Now we want to call the macro in JavaScript. As a first step, and in order not to destroy the existing function, I will simply copy the whole function to the top and rename it XL chart. Instead of creating an empty workbook, we now open the Excel file we just created. Instead of a fixed file name, we enter a function parameter. And then we transfer the name of the Excel file to be opened from GUI XT. First, we define the new function, XL_chart. And then comes the file name of the Excel spreadsheet, which contains our macro for generating a chart, charts.xlsm. And don't forget to save. Back in our JavaScript, up here the file name is passed to our routine. Next, we start the macro we just recorded. This is done with the command xl.run. We specify the name of the macro, but again, here we create a function parameter, macro, so that this script can be more universally applied. That means we also have to go back into the input script to set the desired macro. At the end of the line, i.e. chart map, and save. That should be it. Now, let's test the whole thing. Remember to open a new mode, because otherwise none of the changes we have made in the JavaScript routine will be executed. We click on the Customers per Country chart button, Excel opens up, and the chart is displayed. It looks good. The data are represented as they should be. But how do we get the chart into the SAP GUI window? The first step is to give the newly generated chart a name. That involves a little bit of work in VBA. .chart is the generated chart object. You can find excellent examples of routines for chart generation online that can be quite helpful to change chart properties on demand. We now export the newly generated chart, for starters, into a fixed file named test1.png. We can clean up the code by deleting some of the generated instructions. In fact, we only need to select the columns and then generate the chart. Save, and test the chart. That involves deselecting and selecting the chart. We don't need a new mode because we only changed commands relating to Excel. Here we can see that the image file is generated. That's a good sign. Unfortunately, the chart is disappointing. We have the standard title and nothing else, although the number on the right does look promising. Something was obviously read in, but the chart itself is definitely missing. The problem we saw with the chart has to do with the particularity of the Excel version installed here. The export starts even though the chart has not been completely generated. Charts appear to be generated in several steps by Excel, and this simply takes a little time. There might be a more elegant solution, but my fix is to wait a few seconds. It's your guess as good as mine how many seconds to wait. But the more underlying calculations are required for the chart, the more time should be given. Because, at least in this version of Excel, the export process does not wait until chart completion on its own. We tell the program to wait using the Excel statement application.wait with the current time, now, plus an offset of, say, 5 seconds. Ah, an error. A missing quotation mark. And save. If you discover a better solution than waiting for chart generation, we would be happy to hear from you. And let's test the whole thing again. By clicking on the chart button twice, remember we haven't changed JavaScript, only VBA. And here's the newly generated image, which already looks much better. Now that the generated diagram has been saved as an image file, the next step is to automatically display the image. That's quite easy to do with GUI-XT because we have the image command available to us. Back in the script editor with WYSIWYG mode activated, we click to the right of the box to create a new element, and then click on Image, which causes a small white image to appear. The small white square can be resized and placed centrally within the group box. Now we have to apply the correct file name for the image. Instead of the white box, we choose our image file. That was in the directory My Charts, test1.png. Good. Now the options have to be set. No stretch, and very importantly, no buffer. Otherwise, the images are not refreshed. That looks quite good. We can adjust the position a bit and can choose between leaving the border plain or adding a frame. In that case, we remove the check under plain. Let's leave it like that. Now we need to save the script. Activate and exit the WYSIWYG mode. Next, it's time for another test. But before that, let's delete the image file, because we want to be sure that the new file is actually generated by the newest version of the code. Press on the Customer per Country button twice to restart, and the chart is generated anew. But notice the image is somewhat blurry. The resolution is too low. We can improve the image output by going to the line in the VBA that generates the chart. This function has a large number of associated parameters, 2 of which determine image size. The default is a low-resolution image. Let's try 500 times 300 pixels. That could work. Let's see if that does the trick. Press the chart button 2 times. Yes, that's better. You can now play around with the different options in Excel. For example, you can choose a different background. But we will stick with adjusting size for today because in this video we want to cover the basic steps of displaying Excel charts in SAP GUI windows. We might also need to place the title in a different location or remove it entirely. For example, by setting Has Title to False. The great thing is that you can set all properties in Excel dynamically. For example, you can choose different colors for different conditions. There, after the 5-second delay, our title is gone. What's not optimal at this point is that we currently use a fixed file name for the created image. Let's solve this by going back to JavaScript, defining a new parameter, namely image file name, and now passing the new parameter through to the VBA macro by first adding it to the run command. This now represents the first parameter that is passed to the macro. And save. And then going to Excel VBA and giving the macro chart map its first parameter, which we can call anything in fact. But let's stick with image file name and exporting the chart into exactly this file name. And save. We now go to GUI.xt to define the image to be transferred via JavaScript to the VBA macro. To do this, we first set the file name test1.png to make sure that everything works. Starting again in a new mode because of the changes in the JavaScript routine, good, that works. And now we can get rid of the fixed chart file name. To do this, we first generate a GUI.xt variable for a temporary image file using a special notation in GUI.xt with which we can access window environment variables, in this case variables within the temp directory. In this directory, we define a suitable name. Just to be safe, the file name can be coded to include a timestamp, including date and time. This prevents the program from writing over previous files. You can either allow temporary files to remain until the user deletes them, or you can add a script to delete the files at the beginning of the run. But we don't want to go into that at the moment, although it might be worth picking up on this topic in a later video about file handling. Having come to this point, we enter the temporary image file variable. And lastly, set this new file name in the GUI-XT image statement for the push button. After taking out the fixed file name, then save, and test by pressing the push button for the chart twice. Remember, it will take a little time to generate the file. And it works. Now it would be icing on the cake if we could display a short notice indicating that the chart is being generated so that the user doesn't get impatient after waiting for more than 3 seconds. For this, we can insert a GUI-XT status message before generating the diagram with the title, "Please wait a little bit." Followed by further information for the user using add string statements that will be outputted line for line. But in this case, we only have one bit of information, namely that we are generating the chart for the number of countries in the data set. Finally, when the chart has been successfully generated and can be displayed, the status message should disappear automatically when using the remove command. Let's save, press the Customer per Country button twice, and see what happens. There's the status message preparing chart for 41 countries, but Excel is also being displayed. The good news is that the status message was shown, but we obviously forgot to change the code to keep the Excel window in the background. That's quite simple. In JavaScript, we set xl.visible to false. Adjust the comment to keep from getting confused. And save. To test, initiate a new mode because we have made changes in JavaScript. Press the chart button twice, and yes, the message appears. The chart is being generated for 41 countries, and in the time it takes for the user to read the message, the chart is already completed and displayed. We now have almost finished our code. But I say almost because if we look at the running processes in the Task Manager, we can see numerous active excel.exe instances. And whenever we call up chart generation, a new process is added to the list. It means that all Excel processes that we start in the background remain running, which is definitely not what we want. The trick is to close the Excel call at the end of the script, and for this we always use the same code which is available in our tips and tricks section. These are the lines. Now we delete the remaining Excel processes. That takes a while. There are quite a few of them. They don't use a lot of memory, but it's not good form to have them running in the background. Now they're all gone. Let's start a new mode. Click on the chart button twice. And then repeat to initiate the chart a second time. And a third time. But if we look at the Task Manager, there's only one active Excel process. You might notice that even if you haven't activated a copy of Excel, there's still one Excel exe in the memory. That's okay. The key is that there are not multiple instances. In addition to automating the display of the map, we can use our macro to create other chart types listed in the object browser. For example, let's have a look at the exploded pie chart. We save. Wait for the chart to be generated, and get an impression of how powerful this tool is that we have built. There are endless options to try out. The simpler chart types take less computational time, so we could, in theory, get rid of our 5-second pause. But for now, let's reset the chart back to the original map. Save, and go one step further. We want to let the user select a country, for example, the US, and then display a detailed map. To do this, we go into the WYSIWYG mode, enter the table toolbar, and check the box for a push button for the first column, country, not forgetting to deactivate the read-only option and pressing OK. Now we have push buttons with which the user can select a country, and we want to save. Next, we need to specify the action when the user presses the button associated with a country. We start with process equals and the name of an input script, in this case, customers per region, that generates a more detailed diagram for the country in question. After saving, we create a new script that is first just a copy of the first input script. We could put everything into one single script, but then things get a little unwieldy. The lines to show/display customer information can be deleted. We need to add a table variable, region, which indicates the name of the region within the country. We don't need these two lines either. But now, instead of just reading in table KNA1, we have to add the name of the region using a join statement to another table called TOO5U in the SAP system that contains the names of the regions. For join to work, we must specify the fields used to link the two tables. The keywords for country are land1 in both TOO5U and KNA1. The keywords for region are B-Land in TOO5U, German for Bundesland, and Regio in KNA1. We also provide the language key, preferably the login language of the user, which we can get from the GUI system variable language. When defining the fields, it is important that the table name is preceded by a tilde so that the name is unique. Here we include the country and the name of the region in table TOO5U called BEZEI and the counter. We also set these two variables in the place of land1 for group by and order by. Carefully avoiding too many quotation marks. Next, we need to export information concerning which country the user has chosen to look at in greater detail. For this, we introduce a GUI-XT variable called condition and set condition to equal the country that has been selected by the user. But which country has actually been selected by the user in the interface? Let's first use the GUI-XT variable country, not forgetting a single quote for the SQL condition. I just noticed that region as a table variable is missing at the top. And now we need to know which country push button the user actually clicked on. This information is available in the C tab variable in the column country, and to identify the row we use the GUI-XT system variable tab row abs. This gives us the absolute number of the selected table row. Let's call the newly created table variable ctab_r and add one more import statement for ctab_r, and that should be it. We can keep the name of the file, but this colon should be replaced by M for minutes, and save. Let's exchange that colon for an M in the first input script as well. It's actually surprising that we didn't get an error earlier because colons in file names are often problematic in Windows. Back in the customers per region script, we can use the original status message, adjusting the text to preparing regional chart per country, followed by the name of the selected country to keep the user happy. We generally display country codes. It's possible to read in the actual country names as well, but most people are familiar with the abbreviations. It's important to adjust the table variable to ctab_r and define a new name for the regional chart map regions. So now it pays off that we have made all the calls generic. So let's call it chart map regions. These lines can be deleted. All in all, that was not terribly complicated. The only tricky step was the join operation that requires a little practice. Let's go back to our chart macro in VBA, copy the code, and adapt it for the regional map. Alternatively, you could also re-record the macro from scratch. Our approach today is to adjust the existing routine. To read in columns A to C. This notation would actually be better above as well. A to B at the top and A to C at the bottom. In this macro, we also want to display a title so that our user knows which country is being analyzed. For this purpose, hasTitle is set to true. And accordingly, we now set the property chart title to equal customer distribution in country X. Where the country is read from the active spreadsheet in the top left cell at position A1 in Excel. there's something wrong. A missing quotation mark. We can remove the legend by setting has legend to false. And finally, we can display this chart in a different color to indicate to the user that a different type of chart is being displayed. This is the property chart color, but we can't type in the color directly, for example, green. Rather, we enter a number that codes for a specific color, in this case, the number 19. These color codes are shown under chart options in Excel. In this regard, using the macro recording function is quite practical. Otherwise, you have to play around with the setting. Everything seems set to go. We save and run a test. After pressing US, we wait. And in theory, a new chart should appear. But nothing happens. Not even the status message is displayed. I assume we have a typo somewhere. Have we activated the script yet? Oh, I guess we should have, because activating the script automatically performs a syntax check. We are missing a quotation mark, which is why the input script was not started. So, activate again and test. Now an error message is displayed. Something is wrong with the SQL syntax. Although the input script is executed, nothing useful is generated, which means we have to take a closer look at the SQL parameters and the join operation. The join with the countries and regions, as well as the language key, look correct. The fields and the counter also look good. Although I can't see any mistakes, there has to be a problem somewhere. When you can't find an error, it's a good idea to call up transaction ST22, the ABAP dump analysis for today, because the SQL statement is executed on ABAP level. Here we find detailed information on each error, including something called error analysis. The one at the end of this variable is not good. It should only be BEZEI. It seems that when I copied the name, I left in the 1 of land 1. We save and test again. It looks like we've made some progress, but there's a new error. In this case, the macro was not found. It seems today we're demonstrating all possible mistakes, which can also be useful for learning purposes. Of course that can't work. The macro name is wrong. The G is missing in chart map regions. I can only recommend reading all error messages carefully. Let's try again. It still doesn't work. Yes, there's a common error. Chart title is an object, and it's not possible to assign a string directly to an object. You have to name the attribute you want to change. In this case, using text, because we could also change the color and the font. Save, and nope, that doesn't work, because we're in read-only mode. So we have to close various windows and open the file again, add text to chart title, and save. Maybe recording the macro anew isn't such a bad idea after all. But we're certainly learning something today from our errors. And we test again. And this looks much better. Here we have the customer numbers in the various states of the USA. Let's try Germany. Yes, that's correct. Customer numbers are greatest in the Frankfurt region. And Great Britain. Also good. And France. France doesn't work. I actually expected that might happen, because in France we have both departments and regions. And while Excel uses regions, SAP uses departments. China works? As does Japan. At some point, it will be necessary to adjust for the regions and the departments in France, and then all will be perfect. After learning from our mistakes during the course of this tutorial, we have produced a useful routine that displays two different types of Excel charts in a SAP GUI window.